Tonight on Primetime Politics, the Trudeau Foundation under scrutiny.
I strongly believe that an independent investigation is needed to separate fact from innuendo.
The Ethics Committee grills past CEO Morris Rosenberg and prepares to hear from the Prime Minister's brother tomorrow. Coming up, we will speak to our political strategist about what we are learning and whether Ottawa is doing enough to stop China's interference in Canadian affairs. Also, we will speak with Treasury Board President Mona Fortier. How will the deal reached with the Public Sector Alliance influence future deals Ottawa must still negotiate with its other employees? And the controversial C-11 is now law, but it's being met with more suspicion than praise. Coming up, we will speak to Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Morris Rosenberg is a name that political watchers may remember, as he did report on the 2021 federal election. Now, in that report, he concluded that foreign interference did not affect the outcome of the vote. Well, Mr. Rosenberg was in front of the Parliamentary Ethics Committee this afternoon, testifying not as a former civil servant, but as a former CEO of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. Members having many questions about the donation accepted by that foundation from businessmen with ties to China, a deal facilitated apparently by the Prime Minister's brother, who will appear before the same committee tomorrow. Now, in a moment, we will talk about Alexandre Trudeau, but right now, take a listen to some of the testimony we heard earlier today from Morris Rosenberg.
I approved the donation or it wouldn't have gone forward. But the policy doesn't actually require that I put my own signature on a donation agreement. It was felt that, given that the donation was to honor Pierre Trudeau, who opened up diplomatic relations with China, it would be more appropriate for his son to represent the foundation at the ceremony and sign the agreement. This was consistent with the policy on donations in 2016.
Well, to talk about this a bit more, we're now joined by former Deputy Prime Minister Sheila Copps, Tim Powers, who is the chair of Summa Strategies, and Melanie Richer, senior consultant at Earnscliffe Strategies. Welcome to the three of you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Ms. Copps, I'm going to start with you here because I do want to set up Alexandre Trudeau, who will be testifying tomorrow before the Ethics Committee. Now, it was the Prime Minister's brother who really expressed his desire to appear before the committee in that interview with Le Devoir. But is this a mistake, rather? He wants to be making this argument about the Trudeau Foundation, but I wonder if this is actually the venue where he'll be heard.
Well, it may not be the friendliest venue because obviously the majority on the committee are out to try and make a link that frankly, I think he's there to defend the work that he's done for the last decade with the foundation donors and also with the students who've received doctorate degrees, et cetera, et cetera. So he's got a good story to tell. He is a filmmaker himself by background, and hopefully he'll be able to weave his story, but I do suspect that there'll be quite a few around the table who don't necessarily want to hear his story and want to make their own film. And it's not going to be positive for him. But I do think that there's also a danger that if they carry it too far, it could blow back on them and maybe allow some balance in this debate.
Tim, what's your take on it? I wonder if there is any advantage for the foundation, or really for the Prime Minister, for that matter, to hear Sacha Trudeau speak.
I like Sheila's film analogy. I'm sure the Conservatives do want to turn it into the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I don't see the advantage of Sacha Trudeau being there. I'll give Sheila the point that no doubt he is passionate about the work of the Trudeau Foundation, and it's certainly something I think their family has had great pride about. But I think it's gone past that at the moment. So him being there, at the very minimum, gives the Conservatives and those who are frustrated with everything that's happened with the government's management of the Trudeau Foundation story more of an opportunity to get at that story again. Whenever somebody with the name of Trudeau, fairly or unfairly, appears before a committee, it's going to generate news, and those news links will be driven towards the challenges at that foundation. So I'm sure that passion is driving him, but politics is what is going to be played out tomorrow.
You know, Melanie, Ms. Copps outlined the fact that this committee is dominated by opposition MPs. Talk to us about the kind of scrutiny that Sacha Trudeau does face when he testifies tomorrow.
For sure, he's going to be up against, like Ms. Copps has said, and like you just said, against opposition MPs. So, is there actually going to be an ability to get to the truth and to get to transparency for people? Is he actually going to be able to lay out the way that he sees this play out? I don't know. We haven't really seen opposition MPs use committees in a super strategic way. It's usually to kind of punch each other and to mudsling a little bit, whereas people at home are really looking for the truth behind this. They're really trying to figure out what happened and what we can do to not have this foreign interference happen in the future. So I don't know how his appearance tomorrow helps that. I also would be remiss to say that the Prime Minister has been working since he's been elected in 2015 to not have family members appear at committee, and him kind of putting his hand up and saying that he wants to do that. Goes against all of that work, and also I think kind of sets a precedent where now it is okay for family members to be invited and to be questioned by opposition members, which I don't think is in the interest of really any government, whether it be the Liberal government or whoever is government next.
Well, of course, we're going to watch that testimony very closely tomorrow. But, the whole issue with the Trudeau Foundation, of course, has to do with that donation with links to businessmen from the People's Republic of China. And right now, there's another issue, the revelation that China's state security was actually targeting relatives of Conservative MP Michael Chong. Now, that operation was apparently aided by a Chinese diplomat posted here in Canada. Ms. Copps, Conservatives are accusing Liberals of knowing about this and doing nothing. Is there any way the Prime Minister did not know this was happening?
Well, I mean, obviously the operations of the security service aren't necessarily always brought to the Prime Minister's office. So I would say that there's probably a very good possibility he didn't know. And if you saw Mr. Mendicino in the House today, Mr. Mendicino in the House, he basically said they've started getting briefings more recently. But I know when I was in politics, we used to get off-the-record briefings from Margaret Bloodworth and people from CSIS, and usually they didn't even use names. And our view as politicians was that this is a matter for the police and for the RCMP and not a matter for us. So he wouldn't be the person talking to Michael Chong or to his office. That would have been the responsibility of the RCMP or the security establishment figures who think his family is under threat.
Mm-hmm. Tim, what do you make of the issue? Because certainly the government is taking a battering over this in the House.
Well, no surprise they're taking a battering over it. And I think if we've learned anything over the last number of weeks and months, there is, to put it politely, Michael, an unhealthy tension between some elements of the security service and the sitting government. And that continues to play itself out. That maybe is the greater concern in this whole story, despite what is potentially happening to Mr. Chong. So I don't think the Liberals are going to win the benefit of the doubt on this one, even though, as Sheila points out, there may be legitimacy to their argument, but I think that legitimacy has long since faded because of what we've seen on the front pages of the Globe and Mail and what we've heard from Global Television about how they see, or people in the security services see, this government being asleep at the switch on certain aspects of national security as it relates to the Chinese.
Mm-hmm. Melanie, what do you make of this issue? Because again, the Conservatives are saying that the government knew about this, but right now there's pushback from the government saying, no, we're just looking into it right now.
Right. To Tim's point, had the government actually gone ahead of this when this first broke into the news and said, listen, this looks concerning, we're going to look into it, and we're going to do everything we can to protect our elections going forward, I think we'd be in a very different position right now. And I think the government would have probably earned a lot more goodwill than they currently have. But as it took them so long to even address that this was a legitimate problem and address the fact that they needed to take a look at it. So now that we're here and we're hearing this news about Michael Chong, it's hard not to, for like a regular person watching at home, it's hard for them not to be like, well, obviously they knew. They've been, dodging this answer all along. So had they gone ahead of it, had they, taken it seriously from the get-go, I think they would be better positioned to come out and say, to Sheila's point, that, this isn't something that the PMO would have dealt with. This isn't something that the Prime Minister himself would have had to address. But again, hindsight, and hopefully for the next time they're able to get ahead of it instead of continuously being behind and not responding in a way that really makes Canadians confident that they're taking this seriously and that they're doing everything they can to assure the protection of our elections.
Mm-hmm. I have less than a minute here, and Ms. Cops, I'm going to end it with you, actually. What would...
And say that, when you're in politics, I remember at one point I had a man who came to my mother's office and threatened to kill me with an Uzi. And I had to call the police myself, and they said, well, this isn't a political issue, it's the RCMP. This is for real. He ended up going to court and was deemed mentally ill, and he had previously stabbed a reporter. And I was told, this is a police matter, you stay out of it. So there's lots of threats that happen to parliamentarians across the board. The relationship between the police and Parliament is also mystifying even to parliamentarians. So it's not like they don't want to do anything, but if you responded to every claim and threat that went off on every parliamentarian, that would be all you'd be doing.
Well, with that, that is time. I really appreciate that insight, Ms. Copps. Thank you for it. So Sheila Copps, Tim Powers, Melanie Richer, thank you for joining us this evening. We'll speak again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Federal employees are back on the job this week as the 12-day strike is now over, and the two sides come together on a number of issues. They include higher wages, telework considerations, seniority, and outside contractors as they affect job stability. Now, yesterday we did speak with the PSAC president, and tonight we will hear the government side. Well, we are happy to welcome to the program today the Treasury Board President, Mona Fortier. Madame Fortier, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, we've been mulling over the deal ever since it was announced, and we're looking at these wage increases. We've seen from the government perspective, the ability to keep telework out of the collective agreement, the tentative agreement as such. So when you look at it, is this a win for the government?
I think it's a win for Canadians. I think it's a win for public servants. And I believe that we found the right balance to a fair, competitive, and reasonable deal. And I'm glad, actually, that we announced that we have a 4-year deal, which gives really some stability for the public service, and also we have a line of sight on what's next.
Well, when you say the balance, I know that there's the number balance that you're looking at, as well as how you meet the demands being made by the union. But as one that really was overseeing the negotiations from the government side, what achieves balance for you? What defines that for you?
So imagine when we started, 570 demands on the table. That's why I think that we had a lot of work done. And we started last year, and unfortunately, after our first offer, PSAC chose to leave the table. And it took up until, I'll say, January, February to kind of get back to, are we ready to have, back to the deal? And we chose mediation, and that's why April 2nd we started again. And both teams worked really, really hard, and I think there was a lot that we needed to make sure we were looking at a good increase for public servants, but also there were different issues that were being dealt with. And now I'm glad to report that there is balance, there is stability, and I think the responsibility that I had as president of the Treasury Board is to make sure that it was a win-win for public servants, but also for Canadians, and that was my focus the whole time.
Well, you talk about what you consider a fair wage increase for the employees of the federal government, but from the onset, they were making the argument, the union, making the argument that really what their workers want to do was make sure their salaries were keeping up with inflation. Now, you didn't meet their demand as they defined inflation. And I wonder about the philosophy behind that, because here we are in a country where there is this increasing wage gap between the top earners and the middle earners, not to mention low-income earners. Was that not a consideration? If the members are concerned about inflation, the cost of living, and making sure they're not falling behind, was that not a priority for you?
Well, the first thing is, as the largest employer of Canada, I had to make sure that we had a balance. And if you look at other provinces of what they have as negotiation or agreements with their public servants, how also, the private sector, we had to balance things. And when we started, we were in a certain position. And then the Public Interest Commission shared on February 17th their report, which recommended, the 9% over 3 years, which at the time wasn't 333. Some people thought it was that, but it was 1.5, 4.5, and 3. I think my math is good. And then and we were following, the inflation, but not the same amount, but we had to make sure that we were also looking at what was happening on the ground across the country. So we found that middle ground, and we also offered during the mediation in line with the recommendation of the Public Interest Commission, which is a third party that had studied it and recommended us to go there. So we did. And then I think that and that's where I think both win on the fourth year, the idea of getting that stability, which also aligns with the inflation going down. So I think that we have the right place, and I believe that public servants should be happy with this tentative deal. They need to ratify it, of course, but looking forward to see the ratification.
Okay, so reflective of what is out in the environment. I'm wondering then from the other perspective, because again, telework is not part of this collective agreement, but you've essentially committed managers within the government to speak to individual employees and their requests, and to balance out the requests to work from home. And the federal government, upwards of...
Telework is not just a question of working from home. I think we have to think that it's more. You can be working from another office, another destination. I think that where a lot want to, of course, work from home, they have, and they will continue to do so up to 3 days a week. The telework directive has not been revised since 1993. So that's what we're committing to. Work with the union to look at, let's revise this telework directive and put it up to date to post-pandemic, let's say, era. And that's what we will be doing. And also we chose, because there's different departments, they work differently, the culture of the team, the services they offer, to have a mechanism that will enable somebody from the union and the manager to discuss and look at preoccupations to see if there's a better outcome. But it's non-grievable. It's just to try to find solutions, because we're discovering this telework post-pandemic, and I think there's different opportunities to welcome those conversations.
Which I take it, because the nature of work is changing, but you have set this benchmark now where your employees, those attached with the PSAC, can telework upwards of 3 days a week. Have you set perhaps a difficult precedent for private industry? Because if that is what such a large public sector employer is giving to their employees, have you not essentially painted private companies into providing the same for their employees?
No, I would challenge the fact that actually we looked at what's happening in the private sector, look at what's happening in other provinces, and we are, really looking at an average of what the private sector for many companies are doing, and also the public sector in other provinces and even municipalities. Now, we know that many frontline workers will work in, the workplace, and we have to respect that. I think that we have an opportunity to look at the best of both worlds. What can be done working either from home or for remote work, or again, what can be done in the office. And there are those benefits that will, at the end of the day, make sure that we offer the best services to Canadians. And I think that's the balance that we're trying to find.
Okay, I have less than a minute, but I do have to ask you, because you yourself noted during your news conference yesterday that this negotiation with the PSAC is just one of many to come. So does this deal establish a baseline for other negotiations? The telework aspect, the essentially the line in terms of percentage increase, is this now the deal that you're going to bring to the other unions as well.
I believe so. So we had 2 done before, one in November and the other one just shy of beginning of April. And now with these 4, we have a trend line, I think, that is demonstrating it's over 120,000 workers for the 4 we just signed, and then before it was around 8,000 when you put it all together. So it gives a good trend to continue, and I believe that it's a fair, reasonable deal that is there, and also respectful of the process that we've just been through.
Mona Fortier, really appreciate the time, and congratulations by it's now over, at least this part for you.
Well, that part. There's 20 more to do, though. Thank you so much.
We'll be in connection.
Yes,
so,
we will.
But thank you for that.
Thank you.
The government's bill to amend the Broadcasting Act received royal assent last week, a bill that will require streaming services to support and carry more Canadian content. Known as C-11, this new law has been praised by TV and film producers, but criticized by many online content creators, not to mention online companies like TikTok and YouTube. We're now joined by the Minister for Canadian Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez. Minister, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, I want to begin here with a headline, and this is actually from the Globe and Mail yesterday. I'm going to read the headline to you. It says about C-11's passage. Crowd displeaser. As online streaming act becomes law, just about everyone is unhappy. I want to begin with that because I was wondering what your reaction is to it. Here you are spending all this time to get C-11 passed. It is now passed. It's now received royal assent. But still more suspicion than praise for the law. What's your reaction to that?
Well, that's one paper, one opinion. I disagree with what's said there because, I mean, if you look at the article across the country, there's huge support for this bill because the Broadcasting Act has not been amended since 1991. Many governments tried it before, but never since 1991. 1991, we were not going on the internet. We would listen music on our Walkmans, you know, the little yellow box, and we would go to Blockbuster to rent movies. So I think it's a huge achievement, and people from the music, television, movie sector are very happy.
And that's true. Like we are hearing praise from more traditional media like TV, like film, like screenwriters. But when you talk about new media like TikTok and YouTube, they're not happy about this, nor are their content generators. What do you say to that criticism?
Well, this bill is very simple. Sometimes you see things that are not there. The bill is asking 2 things, right, to the streamers. It's asking Disney, Netflix, and those streamers that we love, you know, the Prime and others, to contribute to Canadian culture. That's the first thing. The second thing, we're asking them to showcase more of who we are, what we are, our stories are. A little bit more about music, maybe on Spotify. A little bit more of our television and movies on the other streamers. That's it. That's all we're asking. Some people see things are not on the bill, but it is what it is.
Well, I guess part of the fear here is, and this is really more with new media, because as you know, algorithms determine so much of what we see online. It gives us not only what we're looking for, but it is also suggesting other media, other files within an environment that you might be interested in. And I guess the concern is, if the algorithm is based with geography, therefore bring more Canadian content to Canadian users, if other countries followed suit, it might limit Canadian content drivers and creators to actually go beyond our country. Those algorithms might, for example, disadvantage Canadians outside of the Canadian environment. What do you say to that?
That's if YouTube decides to do that. I mean, the only people that control YouTube algorithms are the YouTube people. I don't know why they would do that,
But I guess if you're trying to feature more Canadian content on it, if they change their algorithms to feature more Canadian content based on the geography of the user.
They don't have to. It's a decision. I'm interested in the outcome, not in the process. So if they want to change our algorithm, they can do that. But they don't have to. It's not in the bill, and no one can force them to do that. But they can also put more Canadian content on their webpage. They can be creative and buy advertising by the side of their own and say, hey, this great new Canadian movie is out. Go watch it. They decide on how to do it. I want to see more Canadian content. The process is up to them.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was also a concern that this might actually have overreach and affect the individual content creators, user-generated content that are posted onto these kind of websites. But you don't think that's going to be an issue here?
No.
Even though the Senate wanted to pass an amendment that would actually make a distinction, say it would not apply to them.
But that amendment had a loophole in it. But think about it. First, I say we're not interested in looking at the content of creators. I mean, even if it's great, we're among the best in the world. But it's not what we're looking for. But even if we were, how do we do that? Did you ask the questions to these people? How would we do that? There's millions and millions of things uploaded on the internet every day. Who would be watching that? Someone at the government? The CRTC? It's impossible. So not only are we not interested in watching and passing comments on the content, there's no way we could do it anyways.
Mm-hmm. But it does, for example, apply to, as you just said, streamers like Disney+, like Netflix, Apple, as well as Prime. Are you willing to expand the definition of what qualifies as Canadian content in order to satisfy the intent of this law?
The next step, now that the bill became law, is for me to draft a policy directive to the CRTC. And in that directive, I will ask the CRTC to look at the actual definition of Canadian content and to modernize it. So we'll see what they come up to. But a lot of things are very important. For example, the IP, the fact that we need to hire more Canadian people, being actors, directors, technicians. We want to help our industry, and this is what this bill is doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, at the end of the day, when you say that your hope is, or when you write that directive to the CRTC, that modernizing Canadian content and those regulations will be a part of it. So what are you looking for? What is your hope as you consider that document that you send over to the CRTC?
Well, that document is to explain a little bit to the CRTC how some things should be interpreted, or asking them to do certain things. For example, again, modernizing CRTC. I'll be more specific, saying that also that this excludes user-generated content because it's already enough specific, but I will detail it more in that. Should reassure some people, those that need to be assured, and things like that. So once I draft my policy, my directive, then I will be consulting Canadians. Then I'll send the final version to the CRTC, who will produce draft the regulations.
Now, as you said, the intent of this is to have more Canadian production, more Canadian eyeballs on Canadian production. Have you put a dollar figure on it for this new law? How much new production are we looking at? What type of cultural gain will this country have?
Well, there's different ways to contribute, and this is what we'll be exploring. I wanted this to be flexible. Why? Because the streamers don't have the same business model, right? So Disney doesn't have the same business model, and Netflix, and et cetera, et cetera. So in some cases, a company could decide to say, you know what, I'm going to hire more people, more Canadian people, invest more in Canada, have more productions. In other cases, a company could say, you know what, no, I prefer put some money in a fund. So the important thing is to be flexible enough so that all of them contribute. And you know what? They will contribute, because the same way at the beginning, people, Netflix and Disney and others were saying, oh, you know what? If we can avoid this. But now I think they understand that this is where we're going. There was absolutely no law to regulate the whole industry. Doesn't make any sense. No, this will regulate them, and in a very reasonable way.
Pablo Rodriguez, really appreciate the time today. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
And that is our program for this Tuesday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Up next, L'Essentiel avec Esther Bégin. We'll see you again tomorrow.